The funny thing about telling stories about the rock world is that the real stories are crazier than anything I could ever make up. Sometimes to the point where I say, no one will believe this.
New York in the 70s was very interesting. It was very interesting from an artistic point of view. You know, for me, it was an amazing place to be in the 70s.
We were able to faithfully recreate this wildness, this wild nature and the debauchery of the period without toning anything down.
We get a peek into that time, a time that really is a beloved time by many people who are fans of rock and roll, particularly American rock and roll, New York City rock and roll.
We are telling our story in the most exciting environment imaginable, because all the people that we still draw inspiration from today as musicians were there.
This project began almost 20 years ago when Mick Jagger first approached me about doing a feature film set in the world of rock and roll, about the rock and roll business.
I just had this idea for a movie. I went to see Marty, who I knew already, and we just talked about it and started to develop it.
We tried for a number of years to pull it together as a feature, and eventually Terry Winter got involved, and he suggested that we make it into a TV series because it's so rich.
And the great thing for me about writing a television series is you get to dig so deep into characters.
I want you to know what love is.
Well, the city of New York in the early 70s was at this low point with a crime rate that was really high. As is often the case, however, tumultuous times and circumstances can prove to be fertile ground for producing great artists.
There was also something authentic about what New York was. There was an exciting struggle that we were all going through, and it's really dangerous.
What I think is interesting about this period of time is there's a lot of despair in the world, and all that anger and frustration is channeled into the music.
The 70s was the most interesting period because so many different things were happening. 73 specifically was the year that punk, disco, and hip-hop all were invented within a 6-month period of each other, within about a 5-mile radius of each other in New York City.
We recreated Max's Kansas City, and Devin is hanging out there, as well as Bruce Springsteen, John Lennon, Bob Marley and Peter Tosh are on stage with the Wailers. And I said, no, wait a minute, this seems very stacked with very famous people. Are we just loading this scene with recognizable faces? And the producer said, no, this was a real night. A night that didn't seem historic at the time because it was just another great night of music in New York.
Working in the 70s is really interesting because everything is so rich and full of color and reality. Nothing is really perfect. You know, in the 70s, everything was just kind of flowing.
The graffiti aspect of it is interesting. When you think about graffiti in New York, a lot of people flash back to what you saw on like subway cars, these elaborate graffiti murals by these guys who put hours and hours into it. That hadn't really come about in the 70s yet. True graffiti, people were running up, tagging something, and getting out of there. And so that's what we try to recreate with the Scenics. We looked at a lot of research, and I told the Scenics, you know, if it's taking you more than 30 seconds to do that, you got caught.
Some places in the city don't want us to put graffiti all over the place. So the art department would hire the graffiti artists to make the tags on just cardboard. And I just photograph them, high-res photography, and then our compositors will take them one at a time and put them on the buildings, and we'll just use reference photographs.
It's a period when people were really feeling free to explore themselves in their clothing, in the way they looked. People were interested in reinventing themselves. And sometimes we will be in the shop just staring at this clothing and going, what drugs were they on when they created this? This was first time, I think, probably in American culture where people got interested in vintage clothing. So suddenly you've got, you know, young people in the village running around in 1930s clothing and 20s and 50s and mixing it all up in, you know, with the contemporary clothing. And that's what's really fun about this period.
The 70s is so fun because it has so many different types of looks. You have your rock star, you have your glam rocker, you have your punk rocker, you have the mainstream, you have the hippies, you have like the leftover 60s. So it was a lot going on in the 70s.
Evan, hi.
Andy,
You look so pretty tonight.
call me pretty again and I'll bite your nose off.
Does she scare you?
Terrifies me.
John Dunn and I seem to be able to have an uncanny ability to match the walls to the clothing of the actors.
Okay. We're gonna film you now.
Andy Warhol's Silver Factories, that was a lot of fun. We used a building in Brooklyn, a warehouse in Brooklyn. He covered the entire place in aluminum foil and silver paint, and we did the same.
Who and what, Cece?
American Century is our home base set, really, in a way, and it's Richie's office and the front office, the elevators.
When you go in there and you see all the things you don't see anymore, like the reel-to-reel tape boxes, the different kinds of playbacks, you know, the cassettes, you know, all the equipment and all the stuff that's laying around and the magazines that don't really mean anything anymore, and yeah, it really brings you back.
It's funny to think of this as an historical piece because to me, particularly when I was on the set, I'd look around, everybody was dressed in 1973 styles, and suddenly felt very comfortable because I'd been there. I lived through this one, so I got very strong opinions on the way things should look and sound.
Think back to the first time you heard a song that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up.
It was just an absolute insane time period and an insane business.
Made you want to dance or go out and kick somebody's ass.
That sort of encouraged incredibly raucous, irresponsible, but very fun behavior.
That's what I want. It's all about the songs, guys.